name's Philip O'Donnell, and my rank is Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy Reserve. The whole process started when I was a sophomore in college, and I was a philosophy major in college, and I felt a slow change within myself that I wanted to go from theoretical stuff of philosophy and all that to something more hands-on. And I don't know why, but I thought it would be nice to learn how to fly. Once I made that decision, the rest was a matter of applying for flight training. What I did then is I applied to the Navy and I got turned down. So I applied to the Marine Corps and got turned down. And I applied to the Air Force and got turned down. And I kept analyzing what's going on here, and I decided the reason was the U.S. Navy had not that much of a need for philosophers. They like a background in engineering, math, physics, something like that. So I graduated from college. I headed off to law school at Georgetown Law School in Washington, D.C., which at that time was one of the top 3 law schools in the United States. Don't ask me how I got in there, but I did. But I kept applying. And as far as I can tell, somebody just got tired of turning me down. And they got tired of the time having to let him in the door. So I remember I was studying my law school homework in my apartment in Washington, D.C., and I opened my mail, and it said, "We're happy to inform you," and that's all I needed to hear. And I remember closing the law books, putting it on the table, and letting out the loudest yahoo that I've ever done in my life. And shortly after that, I was on a plane. By the way, I was on a plane to learn to fly and to fly off an aircraft carrier, and I had never at that point been on an airplane, or I had never seen an ocean. So I had a steep mountain to climb. That was the story of how I got into naval aviation. I simply wanted to learn how to fly. Well, I went down to flight training, and unlike in the movie Top Gun, you don't come storming through the gate in your own personal motorcycle. That makes for a wonderful movie, but the Navy says, get on that bus, keep your mouth shut, and we'll tell you what to do next, which I did. So we drove through they didn't really say that, but that's the attitude. So we drive through the gates of Pensacola, and you start off running, and they keep you running and running and running, doing this, doing that, and everything. And I remember that first day they gave us 15-minute break. And I walked out to Pensacola. I was on the grounds, and I smelled the salt air. And I looked around at all these big, mean military airplanes, and I felt I'm home. And I'd never been in an airplane before. That caught me by surprise. So then we started the fun and games, or what we Navy cadets called the fun and games, and that was 4 months of what they call pre-flight training, where you don't get near an airplane. You get to look at them through the window. But the pre-flight training, the purpose of that is to bring you up to, you start studying Navy procedures, U.S. naval history, physics, math, aerodynamics, weather, the whole thing that you're going to be getting into. And after that 4-month period, I had reported on October 31st of 1959. My grandson Sam thinks it was 1859, but it was 1959. And so after that 4-month period, I was designated, I was commissioned as a ensign in the United States Navy. So now I'm an officer. And I moved up that ladder from down on the floor of the ocean, I moved up 6 inches on the hierarchy. So the day after I got my commission, I reported to Softley Airfield and started flying airplanes. And then the big dream back then was everybody wanted to be a jet pilot. Jets were new. It was a new phenomenon. And only 5% of the students, the top 5%, 28 of us got jets. And so we were only, I had flown 30 hours in the T-34, and the very first flight, first of all, I had a wonderful instructor, very, very low key. He had to start from the basic. That's the wheel, and that's the wing, and that's the, okay, we're starting at day one. He had a lot of patience, and it's not something that you start doing unless your name is Lindbergh, unless you gotta work. You gotta listen up and you gotta work every detail of it. And so I walked out to the airplane with him with my parachute hanging underneath my buttocks, which World War II stuff, but that's the way they did it then. Later it was incorporated in the ejection seat. And he patiently led me through the pre-flight, and then I got in the front seat. It was T-34 Mentor, North American T-34 Mentor, a single engine, tandem seat arrangement, 225 horsepower Continental inline engine. I don't remember why I remember all these details so much. And so he said, okay, hop up front, which I did, and he got in the back seat as the instructor, and off we go. And I just remember taking off, heading out, gear up, flaps up. I remember I liked the feeling of being in the air. We're all earthbound creatures. Far enough away in space, we look like ants crawling on the Earth's surface. We're not. We're human beings. But I always liked that feeling of being up in the air. And the higher up in the air and the faster I'm going, the better I liked it. I don't know why, but I did. It has kept my interest for almost 70 years now, and I'm scheduled to fly again on Monday. So not supposed to be able to do this stuff at this stage of things, but I'm still flying airplanes in the left seat, and still flying at night, as a matter of fact, until a few months ago when my buddy sold his airplane. So that was my memory of the first flight. And we went out and they start teaching you all the maneuvers and everything, and you do what they call an area orientation flight. You don't know where you are, everything, where is that? You know, rivers going by, you know from nothing. And so you do that, and then that's the start. I loved it from day one. I just didn't know anything. The Navy will put you through the paces, and if you can keep up, they'll let you hang around. I was not a born aviator. I was not another Lindbergh. I was a corn-fed Midwestern boy that needed to learn everything, and it was a steep mountain, and I never flunked anything in the Navy. Nobody ever said you're doing okay, so I only assumed that I was struggling well. So I'm not going to get into jets. I was crushed. So we're sitting there in class one day, and a lieutenant commander walked in and said, as you are, we're sitting there. We snapped to attention. He said, as you were. He said, listen up. This is Navy terminology. He apologized to the instructor for, he said, listen up. And we're listening. He said, we're starting a new test class. The program is to see if we can take students at random from early in the training and put them directly into jets and see if they kill themselves or not. And he said, do I have volunteers? And my hand shot up. The Navy way was you, and you. Get out of here, pick up your orders, report to NAS, Kingsville, Texas, Monday morning at 0800. And I was out the door with the 3 other guys, and the other classmates were thinking, what did he say? Or I want to check with my girlfriend, or I want to check with my wife, or I want to check with my mother. I shot my hand up, go. Normally, if you're going to fly jets, they would give you 150 hours in other airplanes. I had 42 hours of flying when I hopped in this high-performance jet. And so I flew, I don't remember if I flew civilian airlines or a Navy airplane, and the jet base was in the Corpus Christi, Texas area, but I was at Kingsville, Texas, which was a subsidiary field where they had the jet training program. There was another subsidiary field doing the same thing, Beeville, Texas. So there were 2 of those where new cadets got directly in, and I was in the one called Beeville, Texas, near Corpus Christi. So I showed up, and same deal. You start out going to classroom, and you spend the half a day studying the airplane systems, and then you spend the other half a day flying. I completed that program of instruction. I flew the T-2J Buckeye aircraft, which was a single-engine, single-seat, high-performance jet trainer. And that is the airplane that I flew in, and the end of that program was about 6 months or whatever it was, and at the end of that program you headed out to the carrier as a flight of 4, and the end of the program was getting day carrier qualified. So you fly out there and you sneak a peek from 40,000 feet, and you see the carrier you're going to land on, and it's about this big, as big as a postage stamp. And you say, going to be interesting. So down you go. That went fine. What was it like? Well, we descended from 40,000 feet, and down we go, and we entered the landing pattern. And what you do is you come flying over the ship at 300 miles an hour, and you're a finger 4 formation. You're in a right echelon formation. You got the flight instructor who's leading us out there and watching his chicks. And then you've got me as number 2, and another guy number 3 and number 4. And you come flying over the starboard side of the ship, and then you put it into a sharp brake. I as number 2 count 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, and I turn, and now you end up flying downwind and you're staggered. And as you came into the break, you're flying on the same course, or Fox Corpin, the Navy calls it, the same course as the carrier. Now you turn and join downwind, and you are on the reciprocal course, and you lower your landing gear and lower your flaps and adjust everything, lower your hook, which you've never done before in your life, which you could forget, and it has been forgotten. But you get the airplane in what they call the landing configuration. And then you fly. Now you're flying the opposite direction. The ship is going this way, you're flying this way. And when you get a beam, Navy terminology, why not? When you get a beam, the island of the ship, you turn it around, go on base leg, you turn around, line up with the ship, and you land on the ship. I needed 6 carrier qualification landings. I did 6 approaches. I made 6 landings, and they sent us back to Navy Kingsville. We all headed to the Officers Club for a Pepsi or something a little bit stronger. So we were now fully day qualified naval aviators. When I got back from that, a couple days later, I was designated a U.S. Naval Aviator, and that was the end of my training at Kingsville, Texas. I was then ready to be trained for the fleet. You just don't go out to the fleet. You have to go through another 6 months of training before you get out to the fleet. That's advanced flight training. primary flight training was a little prop airplane that I flew 40 hours in. Advanced flight training leading you up to your wings of gold. Designation as a naval aviator. 1315 is a classification. As a naval aviator, everybody has a classification in the U.S. Navy. And so at the end of that program, you are you're not night carrier qualified yet. You're day carrier qualified, you are a new U.S. Naval aviator, and you are officially what they call a nugget. You're brand new. You're gold, but you haven't been shaped yet. You're a nugget. That's the word the Navy uses. And there I was. So now I'm in the jet program. I had never been near an airplane 4 months before, and now I find myself tooling 1,000 miles an hour in Texas, thinking this is happening pretty fast. So another year goes by in the program. I get my Navy Wings of Gold, which I wanted more than anything. Don't ask me why, but I did. And they had asked me, as they ask everybody when you're close to getting your wings, what is your service preference? What is your duty preference? Now I know I'm a jet pilot. The question is, do I want to be stationed on the East Coast or the West Coast? The final determinant is the needs of the service, but they want to know where you would like to serve. I chose the East Coast. Why? Because I'm a Midwesterner. I'd spent time on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. in law school. I'd had a love affair with Europe before I'd even ever been to Europe. So the whole idea of the West Coast and the Far East, no, I wanted the the East Coast, and I got it. The other thing they did is somewhere along this process of they wanted you to select the airplane in the fleet you wanted to fly. And basically my two choices were fighter or attack. And the Navy, through all the training, trains each of you to be either or both a fighter pilot or an attack pilot. They put you through the syllabus for both things. You can be either. And indeed, through all your years in the Navy, you switch back and forth, if you're lucky. And so what I found out is during a little bit of the dogfighting training that we did, I did okay, and nobody I never busted anything, but I found all the grunting and pulling and everything, just a lot of work. And then number two, the radar-directed fighter approaches were just coming in at that time. And to me, the idea of being in an F-4B Phantom, and the controller tells you you got a bogey or a bandit 40 miles at level 310, and they vector you there. Now you become, it seemed boring. Okay, so I thought that an attack pilot, single engine, single seat attack pilot, where you're doing high-speed, low-level navigation day and night over mountains and all terrain, and then delivering weapons, I thought that would be a much more interesting job. So that was my thinking. So sure enough, I went through all the conventional, I got the A4 Skyhawk, single engine, single seat, light attack bomber. And I went through the whole syllabus of becoming qualified on conventional weapons delivery. And by conventional weapons, you're talking rockets and bombs and strafing and ground air supports. And then they also not offered me, and I accepted, but it was really an order more than an offer. I took extra to become a nuclear weapons delivery pilot. You land at Kingsville, you go over to the happy hour, you get up the next morning, you pack your bags, and you're going directly to your RAG. That's an acronym for Replacement Air Group. And you now know how to land a certain airplane on an aircraft carrier in the daytime. what you do at the replacement air group, the RAG, it's another few months of training. They teach you to fly the airplane you're going to be flying off the ship and the squadron you're going to be sent to for the first time. And you're going to also culminate that program by going out and do it at night. So that's what's left of the program before you go to the squadron. So I reported to NAS Naval Air Station Oceana, Virginia Beach, Virginia, which is just down the road here. And I went to the replacement air group's squadron, and there I was introduced to my fleet aircraft, the A-4 Skyhawk, and I began once again an intensive training program of more rockets and bombs and training and everything. And in my case, it was culminated by nuclear weapon delivery pilot training. That training was very specific. It was about 3 or 4 months, and by the time I came along, of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki had only been 15 years before. The Cold War was happening in full force. The doctrine the U.S. developed to fight communism was called MAD, and that acronym stood for Mutually Assured. That doctrine that the Navy applied to combat was called MAD, and that stood for Mutually Assured Destruction. That is to say, the Navy by that time, I had a whole stockpile of nuclear warheads, as did Russia, and you might annihilate us, but you will be annihilated in return. That was the doctrine. So anyhow, they started me training, and you got to study all about nuclear weapons and everything. And the important thing from my standpoint to mention about this to people that don't study nuclear weapons that much, which is who needs it for most people. By the time I came along, the weapons that wiped out 80,000 people, twice 160,000 people, they were almost pop guns as far as power. By the time I came along, 15 years, they had gone from fission to fusion, and I had a hydrogen nuclear weapon which was orders of magnitude more destructive. Here I found myself as a 23-year-old naval aviator carrying a weapon that could wipe out 10 million people. Big responsibility. So anyhow, we go through classroom, we study nuclear weapons, and we take a big test and everything, and they show you a nuclear weapon and show you how to pre-flight it and show you how to arm it, and eventually one day, they hope you don't, but in that time, I'm going forward. I'm on the Enterprise, I'm in the Mediterranean, and there's a nuclear aircraft there, and if I'm the duty pilot and they say launch, in 5 minutes I'm off with a nuclear weapon. I've got my target folder and I'm heading east, somewhere in Russia. So it happens fast. And I went through that for a couple of months, and now I'm ready to go to the fleet, except for one thing. You got to know how to do this stuff at night, guys, because in the Second World War, the vast majority of it, 99% of it, was daytime flying. They didn't even train you how to land aboard ship at night, with a couple small exceptions. By the time I came along, you were expected to be able to do it all weather, round the clock. So I found myself scheduled for my first night flight. Before you do that, what they do is they practice night flying. They have you take off, fly to an outlying airfield at night with, once again, you're in a squadron formation, you and 3 buddies, and you fly to, in this case it was Fentress Outlying Field, OLF, outside of Naval Air Station Oceana. And what they have done is in that field, it's play like it's an aircraft carrier. And the landing signal officer is down there with his radio and everything, and you and your group of other young naval aviators come in, and once again you break, and now what you're going to do is you're going to practice night landings on this runway and play like it's an aircraft carrier. And what you're really learning in detail, you have to be extremely precise in everything you do in aviation, and you can multiply that by 10 if you're doing it at night. You fly the airplane on a landing for the carrier only 3 to 5 knots above stall speed of the airplane. If you slow down 3 knots too much, you flip over and land in the water. So it's a very demanding type thing. So long story short, we had about 3 weeks, 4 weeks of FCLPs, field landing carrier practices on this outlying field. It took about 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to do that. And then when the landing signal officer was satisfied with your performance, he said, okay, we'll schedule you for the boat. They don't call it an aircraft carrier, we'll schedule you for the boat. So, I get emotional thinking about all this stuff. So we're scheduled to go to the boat at night, and normally you fly out to the ship at night in the squadron with the instructor leading his checks. Now it's nighttime. The only big difference is you can't see anything. And if you're wondering how black it is, go to your home wherever you live at midnight, go into your bedroom, go into the closet, turn out all the lights, close the door, turn out the light, and look and see what you can see. That's what you can see flying off a aircraft carrier at night. And that takes some getting used to. So normally you fly out there and do it, but it's a factory. They're trying to move people through. What they did with me and a half dozen other guys, 4 guys flew out the ship with the instructor, and they got us out to the ship. And we were waiting, so I found myself at 0200 in the morning, 0200, 2 hours after midnight, down in the ready room, waiting for my name to be called, and I'm going to go up and hop in the airplane and go night flying for the first time. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of thoughts going through your mind. 3 hours of sitting in the ready room at 2 o'clock in the morning. Anyhow, they said, okay, listen up. And off we go to the airplane, and they're not going to make it easy. It would have been a tad bit easier if I got to get up on the carrier and walk over to the airplane and pre-flight it and get in. No. What they did with me and a couple others, they hot started you. That is to say, one student finished his flight. He left the engine running. He got out of the airplane. I jump on. You're trying to find it. You're trying to see things. I hopped on. The engine's running. Close the canopy and taxi over to the catapult and get hurled off. That was my introduction to night flying off the carrier. So, but it's the last part of the training, something you got to do. So I went around, and the requirement to have 6 arrested landings, and now you're night qualified. So I get in the pattern, and I go around, and I make all my 6, and I kept boltering. That is to say, you don't catch a wire. Your hook didn't catch a wire. Now you add all the power and you go around and you try it again. Meanwhile, you're getting lower and lower on fuel. First 6 times, I did not catch a wire. And now I'm getting critically short on fuel. So the air boss called me and says, such and so 245, your signal bingo. Pick up a heading of 340 degrees, 92 miles for Navy jacks. And so I cleaned up and I headed over, climbed up to 40,000 feet, heading back to Jack, and I felt that my life was ending. I'm not going to be a naval aviator. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. So I'm not going to find out. Now I have to wait 3 days for the LSO, who's training all these other students, to get back to Navy Jacks to brief me and tell me what I did wrong. So now I'm sitting there twisting in the wind for 3 days, thinking my Navy career is over. So he comes in, Lane Hubbard, and he said, Jim, let's go to the O Club. We'll talk it over. So I go and sit down. He said, I did a little investigating. He said, I found out that they underserviced your tailhook snubber. He said, your approaches were spot on. Keep doing what you're doing. What had happened is that when they serviced that tail hook, they messed it up, and the hook, when you normally land aboard ship, it hits, and the snubber holds it down so it can catch the next wire. Since that was under service, the hook bounced up and down, bounced up. There was no way I was going to catch a wire. So he said, we'll reschedule you, don't change a thing. I go out. 2 days later, 2 nights later, got fully qualified in 6 approaches. That was it. All these memories coming back. But the thing that I'll throw out right now that's different about, and people don't realize that the Navy pilot, besides being in that black hole, blacker than black, he never sees the aircraft carrier he's landing on at night. That surprises people. You don't see the ship. You never even see the outline of a ship. So how do you do that, right? The Navy's figured it out. I'll tell you if you want to know. But it's critical. People don't understand that. People think the pilot sees the ship and will land on the ship. You never see the ship. You're in the black hole, landing in a black hole, and you never see a ship until you feel that hook grab the wire and yourself hurl forward and stop. Now you're home. So, does anybody care about how you land on a ship if you can't see it? Okay, you do it all on instruments. There are only 3 components of safely landing on a ship at night. From a pilot standpoint, that's airspeed, angle of attack, and lineup. And first of all, you have to be at the right speed, which is 3 or 4 knots above stall. Drop below that and you die. So you pay particular attention to that. The next thing is the angle of attack. What that is, that tells you where you are relative to the glide slope. You want to be on a 3-degree glide slope from the horizontal. You don't want to be coming down at 10 degrees. 3-degree glide slope, they use 4 degrees in the airline. 3-degree glide slope, and to determine that glide slope and help the pilot know if he's on that, they have what they call the meatball. And that is a optical landing aid. In my case, they put a light, they shined it on a mirror, and the light refracted at 3 degrees, and the pilot sees the refraction of there, and that lets him know that he's on the 3-degree glide slope. Because if you're too high and come down, you crash the landing gear on the airplane. If you're too low and come down, you hit the back end of the ship. So you got to be on that precise 3-degree glide slope. The only other thing you got to do besides airspeed, glide slope, and line up is you got to keep lined up with the landing area. That's more difficult than sound because your landing area is canted 10 degrees to the Fox Scorpion or the course of the ship. The angled deck is, so what you're constantly doing is on your lineup, you're constantly making adjustments to the right as the ship moves forward. But if you nail all 3 of those things, you'll find yourself in this black hole and grabbed by a tail hook at the end of that. So I did all 6 of those, and now I'm a night carrier qualified aviator, and I'm ready to head off to my first squadron. Well, first of all, the USS Enterprise wasn't ready yet. It was a brand new ship at Newport News, Virginia, down the road. I'm based at Naval Air Station Oceana, and so we got to wait a couple months, and so we do our routine flying, day flying, night flying, and everything just to keep proficient. We're waiting for the Enterprise to be finished. So finally the Enterprise commissioning ceremony, and I don't remember, but I might have flown over that aircraft carrier at the commissioning ceremony. Maybe not, maybe I was just in the audience. But long story short, because we had so many of those ceremonies, being a show ship, the Enterprise for the next 3 years, I flew in over them, and some I didn't. So anyhow, long story short, the Enterprise is ready for its commissioning cruise. And so what we do is you load everything up aboard ship, and you head off. Our commissioning cruise is down in the Mediterranean, and they take cranes and load the airplanes aboard ship with cranes. So you walk aboard ship for your first time. You don't. So we headed down to the Mediterranean, and you learn to fly as a squadron and as a air group aboard your aircraft carrier for the first time. And meanwhile, at the end of that 2 or 3 month cruise, the Navy has a great big team of people that come in and evaluate everything about the ship and the flight operations and see if it's ready for deployment. In our case, it was. So we go back to Oceania, and within a week or two, we are headed over to our first Mediterranean cruise, and off we go for the first cruise in the Mediterranean. So the Enterprise, when I first got on there, they gave me a little tour. We went down to the nuclear reactor, and I remember I have memories of looking at something the size of a grapefruit, and that was the core of the nuclear reactor, and that was going to power us around the world for the next 6 months. And I thought, what? The Enterprise was brand new. It wasn't an old rusted hulk from World War II that they had cleaned and repainted. It was brand new. It was all air conditioned. So it was the way to go. It was different between staying in an International Hilton hotel and a Motel 6. It was, if you're going to go on a ship, you want to go on the USS Enterprise when it was brand new. The function of the USS Enterprise back then was to act as the nuclear deterrent. We pilots in the air group were the tools to enforce that enactment should it arise. There was the nuclear-powered Enterprise was a huge ship. It drafted 85,000 tons, and it was a small city for 5,000 men. There were no women aboard aircraft carriers at that time. That has changed. 2 years ago, the Navy awarded the command of a nuclear aircraft carrier to a to a naval aviator who happened to be a female, and she went on to become an admiral and everything else. So the world that I was in with the Enterprise, as far as nothing but men on the ship, has changed dramatically in a good way. So we go over, and our first cruise is 6 or 7 months long, and what you do is you spend 10 days to 2 weeks aboard ship, flying off it day and night, and then you have liberty in some port over the Mediterranean, whether it's Naples or Côte d'Azur, the French Riviera, Barcelona, wherever it is, you have your liberty as the ship goes all around. Meanwhile, what you're doing over there is you are the nuclear deterrent, and you're within flying range of some place in Russia. And so your job is to stand by and see if you're needed. Meanwhile, you're flying off the ship day and night, all the time, while you're there. So you got a full-time job, just like reporting to your desk in the office, except you're flying airplane where I wanted to be. And your full-time job is to fly day and night off the carrier, waiting for the call, which never came, thank God. And so I spent that first 6 to 7 month cruise. I eventually made 2 other 6 to 7 month cruises on the Enterprise, with one short cruise during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I found myself on the USS Independence. I don't even remember how I got over there. But So I ended up flying 3 full 7-month cruises on the Enterprise, and that was my life for those 3.5 years aboard the USS Enterprise. Flying off a ship is a very hazardous occupation. We were at peacetime. I reported to my ship, my squadron. The first 7 days, the Enterprise, we were operating at sea in peacetime. We had a memorial service every day. We had, let me think what it was. We had, we had a memorial service every week for the first 6 weeks I was on cruise. Somebody got killed, a pilot got killed, training. We weren't at war. And so I wondered a couple times, what have I gotten into here? Because we had a memorial service every week for the first 6 weeks for the Enterprise. Then everybody got their act together and started smoothing things down, and we didn't lose any more after that. So I had been flying off ship for about 3 weeks, and somebody thought, the commanding officer thought it was a good idea if Jim learned to be a landing signal officer. That's a nice thing. It's a compliment that they ask you to do that. You're going to be the guy, the officer, the pilot that's standing on the landing signal platform, and you're going to be watching the other pilots come in, and you're going to be giving them voice instructions on do this, do that, you're low, add power, wave off. So you're the guy in charge on the ship day and night of seeing that their profile coming in is precisely where it should be. So I head out at nighttime to observe being a landing signal officer at night. So I go out there, introduce myself to the real landing signal officer, and the first ship coming in is an A5 Vigilante, black night. And I'm standing there watching this, and the landing signal officer said, "You're getting low, add power, and at that, the pilot, for unknown reasons, lowered the nose, flew into the back end of the ship. Only the canopy and all the flames from the fuel tanks exploding, a huge mountain of flame came rolling down the flight deck, and that's my introduction to night flying off the aircraft carrier. And of course, the pilot was gone, and so the next day, I had visions of the ship being all crumpled in pack, and we're going to go. You couldn't even see it. You couldn't even see damage. You didn't even need a Band-Aid. The airplanes are 1/4 inch of aluminum, and that's all concrete back there. The ship doesn't even know it's not an airplane, bangs into it. So, so that was my introduction to night flying off the aircraft carrier in the fleet. And that wasn't the last. That was just the first of many. The Navy doesn't call them crashes. The Navy calls them mishaps. Kind of a nice, friendly word. Our pilots don't crash. They just have mishaps. I had a total of 374 aircraft carrier landing. And night landings, one of the problems with them, you don't get to do them that much. If you got to do them every other night, it might not be so scary. But what to give you, I don't know what the average number is, but Eugene Cernan, who ended up as an astronaut in the last, he was a naval aviator, flying my same airplane in the fleet, but he went on to become an astronaut, last Navy pilot to land on the moon. But he flew my same he got 36 night carrier approaches and landing, and I got 82. And to tell you about the difficulty of Neil Armstrong, the first man to land aboard ship. Neil Armstrong, the first man to land on the moon, was also a naval aviator. And when he came back from landing on the moon with Buzz Aldrin, they interviewed him and wanted to know how difficult was it to fly to the moon and land on it. And he thought for a minute and he said, it wasn't as difficult as a night carrier approach and landing. It gives you an idea. So I did 82 of those babies and 374 total. And I loved every bit of it. I didn't fly scared. I was where I was supposed to be. I would like to tell you about my most memorable night flight off of the USS Enterprise. So if it's something that is of interest, I keep coming back to night flying off the ship. Everything else pales in comparison. Before you've ever landed at night, in my case, sitting down in that ready room at 2 o'clock in the morning, your predominant feeling, your mind is a feeling of dread. Because you've never done it before and you feel like you're probably not going to come back from this. That's the first thing, okay, that you have. But you go up and you do it, you're trained and you do it. That's only a one-time occurrence. When you get out in the fleet and you're scheduled, you only get to fly once every 7 nights or whatever it is. When you get out into the fleet and you see you're on the night schedule, different feeling. Your feeling is, well, okay, I want to get my little afternoon lie down. You start thinking, preparing for that night flight in your mind, but there's no feeling of dread. It's simply, basically, you're now a professional naval aviator. I ask people, what do you think is the thing that the U.S. naval aviator fears most happening if he's flying off the ship at night? What is the one thing he doesn't want to happen? What's the one thing he fears most? And the answers might be, oh, he doesn't want the engine to quit, or he doesn't want to run out of fuel, or he doesn't want to crack. No. The thing the naval aviator, at least this naval aviator, didn't want to happen above all was vertigo. Spatial disorientation, the thing that killed John F. Kennedy Jr. Okay. The reason vertigo is so insidious and a killer is that it happens very quickly and you're dead very fast unless you handle it. The Navy is very, very familiar with the problems of spatial disorientation at night off a ship, and their solution is they don't spend 2 months talking to you about it. They give you 3 words. They say, yes, we're very aware of that problem. The solution is, quote, trust your instruments. Okay, well, I found that that's easier said than done. So, we'll go back to that night flight that I'm talking about. It was a nice night, no moon or anything, blacker than haze. I was still a junior officer, and the commanding officers fly on a nice moonlit night where you got a little bit of light from the moon, but they send all the JOs, the junior officers, the nuggets, off on the nights where it's really black. That's privileges of seniority. So anyhow, I go up for my night flight and they launch me off. This, by the way, happened a half dozen times on night flying, spatial disorientation. But the worst case was, it was a routine night flight, everything was normal, flying around, the normal turbulence, the normal clouds, the normal things and everything. So I finished, I'm coming back on the ship at night, and what you do is they don't have you come to the break and come around and land on the ship. They send you out to Marshall Point, which is 30 miles behind the ship, staggered altitudes, where you come in on a carrier control approach, a radar control approach. That's how you land aboard a ship at night. And so I left, I hit my Charlie time, which is you're cleared to land, and I head on in. You have a profile you fly a certain speed, certain rate of descent, you start dirtying up the airplane, gear down, flaps down and all that. And I don't remember when it set in, but I realized that I was disoriented, starting to get spatially disoriented, because you have to do a little bit of turns coming into the ship. You're turning. What's happening is these air follicles in your ears. When I stand up here, I don't fall down because I can see the floor and I can see the walls and I know what's up and down. You don't have any, and these hair follicles in your ears will give you that sense of balance. You don't have any of that in this black hole. And what happens, these are lagging indicators by a few milliseconds. And in an airplane, if you turn here a little bit and it's lagging, you think you're still straight, so you turn a little bit more and you're actually in a turn. Okay, that's spatial disorientation, and it kills quickly. I was aware that I was getting spatially disoriented due to the movements of the airplane and the turbulence. There was a little bit of turbulence that night. How bad was the spatial disorientation? I was 500 feet behind the ship, flying a high-performance jet, can't see the ship, and I felt like I was hanging upside down in the airplane, flying in the back end of the ship at night, and I'm going to be dead in 3 seconds. It's a bad feeling. It's beyond terror. And your body reacts, the adrenaline, you didn't know your body was capable of producing that much of a reaction. The body wants to survive. It's instant, and it's just a burst of a feeling of terror. The body mind is telling you, unless you do something, you're going to be dead. And yet the Navy has said, I looked and my instruments were perfect. The Navy has said, trust your instruments. But every fiber of your being that's kept you alive on Earth is telling you, you're going to be dead. And it was so real, the feeling of flying upside in the back, that I could feel my torso harness, the straps, digging into my shoulders as if you were hanging upside down. And the last word I'll use is that it is way beyond terror. And it goes back to caveman times. It's, it's the body is equipped to do everything, and the feeling of terror. And right then, what I could either do was do something and die, or what I had to do then was fly extremely smoothly and precisely the way it was supposed to, which is what I did, and I landed. But that's the memory. And that happened 4 or 5 times on all the different cruises. And so that is the thing that engine failures, low on fuel, engine fires, the pilot can handle. A situation where your body is going to kill you using the thing that's kept you alive walking around on Earth, that's a whole different problem. That's what the pilot worries about. You have no control over it. So, off this ship, now you're a professional Navy, flying extremely smoothly and precisely at all times is a requirement, or you're dead. And so you're trained to do it and you do it, or if you don't do it, you're not around. That was the story that's worth telling. And that's what young men are going through today. Except they have we had very basic stuff back then, just after World War II. Everything was manual. They've got automatic landing systems now. They got all these lights and gizmos and things that they call it the magic carpet. We didn't have any of that. We had, you were always coming back to the ship at night, couldn't see anything. You were always low fuel state. So there was no such thing as a dull night flight off the carrier. Okay, I kind of covered that, but I think you see the emphasis I place on that. And yet, I was down giving a speech to new naval students 10 years ago. We were having a pre-flight reunion, my class. The class asked me to get up and say a couple of words to all these students, and the instructors are sitting around on the walls. They're wearing their flight suits, so I stand up and got all these students paying attention. I said, you know, I said a few words beforehand, and I said, you know, it's very hard to predict the future. But I said, you are right now where we were. I turned to my fellow naval aviator. I said, you are right now where all of us were 55 years ago. And I said, it's hard to predict the future, but I will tell you this. I said, nothing you will ever do in your life will be as challenging, as harrowing or as personally satisfying as landing off of an aircraft carrier at night. And these guys, students' eyes were getting bigger and bigger, and the instructors were going, oh, yeah, God, yeah. They each got, you know. So that's what I said to these young guys is that, and it's nothing you will ever do will be as challenging or as harrowing or as personally satisfying. Everything else you do is no big deal. I divide flying off the aircraft carrier in two distinct parts, and that is day flying and night flying. The day flying I always looked forward to. It was fun. It was just pure fun to me flying off. The night flying was work. And so I viewed the night flying from that standpoint. It was work, and to be done precisely and successfully so that you live to fight and fly another day. As far as the payload, it made no difference to me. I'm talking strictly for myself. It made no difference to me whether I was carrying rockets or bombs or a nuclear weapon. My job was simply, I swore an oath when I came in to follow the lawful orders of the commanding-in-chief. So to me, my job was to be ready and to do what the President of the United States ordered. And so I didn't feel any psychological misgivings. I do think being 23 and 24 years old, I underestimated the responsibility that was entrusted to me. I mean, I just thought, hey, I can handle it, no big deal. But now I look back on it, and I think of the responsibility. It was a huge responsibility. I felt the same way when I was captain on a 747, and I'd leave the cockpit to go to the bathroom, and I'd midnight over the North Atlantic, and I'm looking at 434 people who have entrusted their, you know, that's a big responsibility. And so I felt the same way about my Navy duty, but I wasn't concerned about the responsibility or wasn't concerned about whether I would do it. And part of that's my generation. You did what you agreed to do. And I didn't spend a lot of time processing it. I just didn't. That was my job. Oh, I not only experienced refueling in the air all the time, but I was also one of the two designated refueling pilots. In other words, usually throughout my whole Navy career, dozens if not hundreds of times, I came in and I lined up and I took fuel from the tanker aircraft. But in addition to doing that, on other flights, especially the night flights, I was designated as the tanker pilot. Now I'm the guy that is going to be giving away the fuel. And the only problem with that job was that it requires an extra degree of precision, because this other guy is trying to plug into this basket, and if the pilot is not extremely smooth, he's not going to be able to plug in. And the way I view the job of being the tanker pilot is that what I would do is I'd circle the ship at 5,000 feet, and then a fighter airplane would get low on fuel, and I've got to go find him in the black hole and give him refueling so he doesn't flame out. And so I gave him fuel, and it made him happy and it made me sad, because I'm giving him fuel because he's low fuel state, and I'm giving him mine. Now I'm low fuel state, but that was the job. So I did both. I not only, dozens if not hundreds of times, I not only took in-flight refueling, but I gave it as the tanker pilot. You usually flew 2 flights a day off the ship. And so your day was taken up, if you were scheduled at night. If you were going to do day flying, you would do your day flying and you go to bed at a normal time, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. If you were going to do night flying, you would take a little afternoon nap to get ready, and then you'd go night flying. And sometimes a couple times I did as many as 3 flights after midnight, and I'd make my last recovery, the third flight, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock in the morning yet. So then you'd go to bed after you got back from that. As far as a normal day of day flying, you would get up, you would head down to the ready room. That was your home aboard ship. It was you had your stateroom where you slept and read your books. But the ready room where your squadron congregated was where you lived aboard ship. You didn't wander around the engineering spaces or any of that. So you'd report to the ready room and you would start briefing for your morning flight. In the afternoon, you'd start briefing for your afternoon flight. You'd do both of those. You had ancillary duties as a Navy pilot aboard ship. Because I had spent a little time in law school, I was the squadron legal officer. Legal problems come up in a squadron just like anywhere else in life. And so that is how you spend your days and nights. You grab a bite to eat when you can, and I was not only legal officer, but I was also the officer in charge of, I don't know what, call them secret documents or all that is not supposed to be read by everybody. And so that was normal life. Mostly the flying and the briefing for the flying and the briefing after the flying, doing it twice a day took up most of your work day. Sleeping quarters was tight. It was about the size of 2 bedroom closets, and what it consisted of, you walked in this, they called it a stateroom, and if you've been on cruises in civilian life, if you've got a 225-foot stateroom, the staterooms aboard the ship were even a little bit smaller than that. You walk in into your stateroom, and directly ahead is a sink, and to your left is one bunk bed, and I had either the top bunk or the lower bunk, I don't remember. And then no, the sink is off to you come in, it's off to the left here, away from the bunk, and directly ahead you have a little desk and bureau and a chair, and that is it. That is your stateroom. And it's tight because space is at a premium aboard ship. You had 2 different food areas aboard ship. You had the officer's wardroom, they call it, and with the officer's wardroom you could have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, but you had to be in uniform. As a pilot, we almost never ate in the officer's wardroom. We lived in our flight suits. And so what they had was what the Navy calls a gedunk. I don't know where the word comes from. That's a place where you go get a hamburger or some salad or something like that. And you ate all your meals at the gedunk. You just go down and grab a greasy cheeseburger or something, a French fry, and get ready to go flying. You found yourself once every month or two in the wardroom having dinner, but your job aboard ship was flying day and night. And it facilitated that very nicely by living that way, just in your flight suit all the time, around the clock, ready to go, and eating food from the gedunk. Back in my day, which is the only one I knew, I have memories of making something like $240 a month, and $65 of that was hazardous duty pay. So it was basically a pittance. They're paid much better now with inflation, but my pay was negligible. And yet I never had more money in my life, but I didn't have a wife who liked to spend it. And so, you know, and what are you going to do with money? You don't have any need for it aboard ship. The captain of the Enterprise when I was there was Captain Vincent P. Dupois, who was a Naval Academy graduate, and he eventually made 3-star admiral and lived to the ripe old age of 94. I've had a number of things that happen that scare you to death, and so everybody probably approaches it differently, and I think pilots do project that air. But from a piloting standpoint, the first thing you realize is that going crazy or wouldn't help the situation. All that's going to do is mess things up further. So that's not an option. And pilots, basically, if they are confronted with something, it's not a matter of fear or, oh my God, it's a matter of what do I do next? And so it's a functional type of thing where your training and your approach to life and your approach to flying requires a degree of calmness and objectivity. And so the whole thing of emotion, we are emotional human beings like everybody else, but emotion doesn't help in those situations. So as a pilot, part training, but also part of who you are as a person, contribute to that sense of calmness. We used to have a saying as Navy pilots, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing their mind, you just don't realize the seriousness of the situation. So that's how we approached it. A little bit of humor there. You just don't realize how big of a problem you're in, buddy. The Enterprise was what I call a show ship. It was the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Consequently, we always had celebrities, and we give a big air show, and a couple times we had the President of the United States, all the members of Congress, all the ambassadors from all the countries, movie stars, and aboard ship, and we'd be out at sea, and we'd do a great big air show. And I remember one time we were in port, and our commanding officer, who was a drop dead of the Enterprise, drop dead, good looking Vincent P. Dupois, Captain Vincent P. Dupois. He was a Naval Academy graduate. He could have been Hollywood handpicked. He was so good looking. And he was meeting with Sophia Loren on the deck of the ship. It was just everybody wanted to see the Enterprise. So it was a real showboat. And when they all came, we did it half a dozen times over those a couple times each cruise, and we would take off 50 airplanes in the air group and put on a great big air show. And so I never met anybody who was famous while I was aboard the Enterprise. And I was just a very, very small cog in a very big wheel. And for example, when we had celebrities or congressmen aboard, I would either fly in the air show, or one time I remember we had a whole bunch of ambassadors from different countries, and my job was to escort the ambassador from Ecuador around the ship and make sure he didn't get lost wandering around. So that was my job. So you just had different duties. And I did get the privilege of saying a word with John F. Kennedy when he was President of the United States, and this happened aboard the Enterprise. And my memory of it is, for some reason, I was not flying the air show that day. You kind of alternated. And we were all lined up, all in our dress white uniforms, and President Kennedy, as they do, is they review the troops and they walk along, and so I was one of 20 naval officers in my squadron who were all lined up at attention, and he walked by and just looked at everybody, and he came up to me and he stopped, and I noticed he looked at my name tag. Had O'Donnell on it, and one of his primary advisors was Kenny O'Donnell in the White House, and I don't remember what he said, but that's why he stopped. And he was just very, very gracious. He flashed that $1,000,000 smile, and he was very gracious, said a couple words, and then he went on. And said, "Thank you, Mr. President." And when I saw him once before, I was going to law school, and he was running for President of the United States. And he was coming out of, I was between classes at Georgetown Law School. He was coming out of a laundry, picking up his shirts in Georgetown, and he was running for president, and he waved or something, and I waved back and said, "Good luck." And that was, but he was a half block away. But he was fetching his shirts from the laundry. When the Cuban Missile Crisis was taking place, I found myself flying off the USS Independence. And I don't remember why our squadron ended up going on the, I just have no memories of that. But what I do remember, everything was very, very jumbled and happening very, very quickly. After all, I was based on the Enterprise, and we were out of Oceania, and they had a problem down in Cuba, and so somehow all I remember is I was on the carrier Independence looking south at Cuba, standing on the flight deck, and I had all my gear on. I was ready to go fly and start bombing Cuba if the call came down. It did not come down. It was resolved. I am not aware of any encounters. There were threats and mutual threats. There were photographic flights that the Navy sent off to keep an eye on what was going on in Cuba. But I am not aware of any encounters that actually happened. But it was all by a hair's breadth. It could have, and I had an airplane locked and loaded, and I was ready to go. You know, you can't take a half hour to prepare in times like this. If the call goes out, you got to jump in and go. Oh well, we were on constant alert, and what you have is it's serious business. Well, the first thing worth telling is before you can be in that alert aircraft, you got to learn in training what it's like to carry a nuclear weapon. So the most exciting part of that training that happened to me was I was on a practice nuclear weapon out of Oceania flying, and we had a shaped bomb that was in the weight and characteristics of carrying a nuclear weapon, and I was doing a nuclear weapon delivery profile like I was heading into a target. So you're doing high speed, low level. I was at 50 feet above the water, going like a bat out of hell, excuse me, doing 600 miles an hour, and I got hit by a very big bird. Well, that's very exciting also. And my initial reaction was it felt like a missile had hit me or something, and I just immediately pulled up. Give me altitude. Give me altitude. Altitude is time. You need time to sort things out. So I just pulled up, did a Whifferdale maneuver, and headed back towards Oceania. And the airplane instruments were fine and everything. And I landed, and I got out of the airplane, and the whole jet intake had been ripped off from the side of the airplane. So I got lucky on that one. So anyhow, now we fast forward. I'm on the Enterprise doing the real thing. And, oh, by the way, if that bird had gone into the intake, there would have been lights out on the engine. I would have ejected on the spot. But instead, it was a very considerate bird. It just hit the air intake, ripped it off, and then went off to the side. Not in very good shape, that poor bird. I was doing 600 miles an hour. So anyhow, going to the fleet, the Enterprise, what we had is the real deal, an A-4 Skyhawk with a nuclear weapon attached to it. And I did regular duty as the nuclear weapons ready pilot. And what that meant is that if the call went out, they don't want to give you time to go have lunch and a cup of coffee and then head to your target. you got 5 minutes to start the engine, get catapulted off, and head to your target. And so I spent a number of duty periods in that over the years that I was on there, but they never, the mutually assured destruction policy worked. So we never had to launch with one of them, which was the purpose. But I was trained. If they told me to do it, I would have done it. That was my generation. You don't say, oh, I don't feel like it, or I don't agree with that, or my back hurts, or yeah, no. You do what the Navy tells you to do, and that's my generation. But I didn't have to do it. But I was trained to do it, and I would have done it. And long story short, I ended up putting in 5 years, which was the contract at the time. I got out of the Navy because I decided, why did I get out of the Navy? I got out of the Navy because I absolutely loved it, and it was a close call. But I didn't want to spend the next 25 years of my life doing an endless series of 6 to 8 month cruises. I grew up without a father who died early and no family life, and to me, the wonderful way to live was to meet a wonderful woman, marry, have children, and live in a lovely home. That to me was something I never had, and that was subconsciously what I wanted. So I decided to get out. I returned to Georgetown Law School. I don't like loose strings, and I was talking with the dean 2 days before class started, and he said, we're glad to welcome you back. And he said, almost as offhand, he said, oh, by the way, he said, you're going to have to repeat that first year. And I stood up and I said, sir, it was very nice to meet you, but I have no intention of redoing that first year. I wasn't interested in doing that. I figured, give me the job, I'll catch up with what I forgot. So anyhow, they had their own way of doing that. So I left, and I eventually became an airline pilot and retired as an airline captain flying the 747 aircraft for TWA after 34 years. So, the only other thing on the Navy, I was out of the Navy for, I got out in October of '64. I met my future wife the next month in Washington, D.C. My life is entwined with Washington, D.C. My daughter lives there now. And so immediately after I got out of the Navy in '64, I was looking for an airplane to fly. So I was in the Weekend Warrior program, U.S. Navy Reserve, and I flew the A-4 Skyhawk there. And that was until 1968, and then, as I like to put it, the Navy decided they couldn't do without me. And when the USS Pueblo was seized, they recalled me to active duty for my second tour of active duty. And I got trained in a couple other different airplanes. What happened on that? That was just under a year of duty. They called up the reserves. They called up my squadron. And so what we did is I reported, I put in the papers to TWA to take a leave. The government has an arrangement with airlines that in national need, military need, that you release the pilots who are qualified to go and do their military duty. So I had cleared that with TWA, and off I go. And we started out by staying right there at, and you don't know what's going to happen, whether it's going to be war or what. We stayed right there for 3 months at Floyd Bennett Field near Kennedy Airport in New York as a squadron, where I flew as a reserve weekend warrior, and now you're back on active duty. That's the only difference. You're not a weekend warrior. I have started my second tour of active duty in the Navy. And so you did what you always do. You do your practice flying day and night and stay ready. We did that for 3 months, and then Vietnam was really heating up big time. And so this would have been 1968. Yeah, Vietnam was really starting to heat up. So they sent us down to Cecil Field. We started training down there and getting ready to go day and night carrier qualifying again. And now we know it's going to happen. The Pueblo crisis is over, but now they're short of pilots in Vietnam. So now we know we're going to head over to Vietnam. And that's a real meat grinder over there for A4 pilots. Life expectancy as an A4 pilot in Vietnam was not very good. So anyhow, we're getting ready to be day and night carrier qualified to go over to Vietnam. They never said that, but we were pretty sure it was going to happen. So we're in classroom one day getting ready to go flying. And they did it the Navy way. The Navy lieutenant walked in and said, "Excuse me," to the instructor, "listen up, we don't need you, you're all released from active duty." I said, "What? What are you talking about?" So the guy didn't listen to it twice. They just got up and we were all done. That's the Navy way. "We don't need you, go home, we're done with you." And so that was, I came home, and Isabel now was my wife and mother about to be of our first child. And we packed up my Porsche and headed back to my job as an airline pilot. Everybody reacts to going to war differently. I didn't work at my reaction. It was very, very natural. And there are some pilots, there are some people, maybe you're one of them, and maybe even non-pilots, but they want to see how they perform in combat. They want to see if they measure up to it. They want to go get some medals. All that, none of that entered my mind. I would have done whatever they said without question, but I had no desire to drop bombs on people. I had no desire to fight in a war. I had no desire to collect a whole bunch of medals. I had come in the Navy to learn how to fly. They taught me how to fly, and I was going to do what they told me to do. But I had none of those. I didn't wrestle with any of that other stuff. I never questioned my ability to, I've never underestimated my ability. Maybe I've overestimated it a number of times. But I never questioned whether I would measure up to something. I just never entered into it. When I was released from active duty, the Navy, the airlines were desperately in need of pilots. Matter of fact, United Airlines were putting ads in the paper to civilians walking around the street. "We'll pay you $1 million to fly for United Airlines." If somebody was interested as civilians, they'd teach them to fly to be an airline pilot. I had a different story. I was fully qualified with 2,000 hours. I was gold. To the point where 3 months before all of us were released from active duty in my squadron, Pan Am sent a representative to the Enterprise, and they said to any pilot, anybody that signed here, and you'll get a class date to be a pilot with Pan Am. I didn't have an interest in going with Pan Am. I didn't sign. A few of my buddies did. I was going back to law school, so I passed that up. But I applied to TWA, and they were desperate for pilots. Guess what happened? I never heard back. And the months went by and I never heard back. I wrote them again. And yet I've got exactly what personnel officers of companies, offices, some of them are screwed up. So anyhow, I didn't get any reply from TWA, and so one day I'm reading the Washington Post and I see where TWA is putting an ad, "We really need," and I thought, what is this? So I get on an airplane and I flew out to Kansas City where TWA is, and I'm knocking on the door. "What's going on?" Well, they very sheepishly said, "Well, this happened and that happened. When can you start?" But the personnel office had screwed up. So as soon as they found I was available, they wanted me big time, and so I started right away. I first flew, I went from flying high performance, the highest performance Navy airplanes, fighter airplanes, single engine, single seat, capable of 2,000 miles an hour plus. And I found myself as a flight engineer in training on a World War II Constellation propeller-driven airplane, no jets, not even a pilot. I was going to be a flight engineer. And the Constellation was World War II era. It had 4 enormous engines, and I knew nothing about being a flight engineer. I was a jet pilot. What did I know about prop airplane? So that was another very steep learning curve. And to show you the difficulty of becoming a flight engineer as a pilot is that TWA hired 2 different groups of people. They hired some people and they were making pilots right away, and they hired other naval aviators who were going to make them flight engineers. It was random whenever they needed pilots or flight engineer. Totally random. I drew being a flight engineer. Actually, they first had me in a class to be a pilot, but I stayed around in DC to attend a dance of my fiancée. That basically cost me 15 years in the left seat, but that's another story. It was worth it. I got Isabel. I married Isabel. But since I stayed around to attend a dance of some kind for Isabel, I passed up I didn't know if I was going to be a pilot or a flight engineer. I lost that pilot chance, and when I showed up a week later, the next class was an engineer. But to show you the difference between that, the pilot class would have been 3 weeks, and I would have been flying pilot TWA on the line. 3 weeks. Flight engineer class was 6 months. And they basically taught us every nut and bolt of the Constellation aircraft, this huge 4-engine bomber type aircraft, to the extent where they taught us how, if you had a problem getting the landing gear, they taught you how to replumb the entire hydraulic system. The training was beyond detail. Was the Lockheed Constellation as a flight engineer? The first type I flew as a pilot was the 727, a 3-engine jet. Now I'm a co-pilot, or first officer they're called. Now I'm a first officer in my first jet. I was a flight engineer for 18 months, and they parked the Connies. They were done with them forever. They're antiques. And I transitioned to become a jet pilot, a first officer or co-pilot on the 727 jet aircraft. The 747 was the queen of the fleet. It was the biggest airplane in the world at the time. It weighed on takeoff. The airplane I fly now weighs 1,500 pounds on takeoff. The 747 weighed 734,000 pounds, and we carried 434 people. So when I first strapped into as captain of the 747, every time I strapped into it, it felt like it was an honor and a privilege. I was at the top of the mountain, and it took a lot of luck. You got to stay healthy, you got to stay lots of things. It took a lot of luck, but I felt it was a privilege and an honor. It was a feeling every minute I spent as captain of the 747. The most memorable flight I had, my first flight as a captain of the 747 was from St. Louis to Hawaii, and I took Isabel with me. That's what made it so special. And but for TWA, where did I fly for TWA? I flew basically all around the world, but I preferred international flying. I preferred specifically Europe international flying. I flew, I don't know, 10 years domestically until I got senior enough to fly international. And then TWA was an around the world airline again. I went to Polar School as a co-pilot to be trained to fly around the world and all that. It didn't end up happening because the economy crashed and they canceled the usual cyclical aviation thing. But I basically spent the majority of my time flying internationally to Europe and the Middle East and with a smattering of the Caribbean, San Juan and different islands in the Caribbean, Cuba. But most of my focus, I made probably 800 trips to Europe over that time. So that was my focus. That's where I wanted to be. I didn't care if I ever got to Shanghai or, what can I tell you, too many people. I don't like to be around people. So I was happy as a clam flying to all the different wonderful places in Europe. A couple times the turbulence was so bad that you couldn't read the instruments. However, that's very rare. However, turbulence is a fact of life for airline pilots. What do? First thing you do is you strap in all the passengers. Otherwise, they end up in the hospital crashing to the ceiling. The second thing you do is how do I get out of it? So through a period of radio communication with other pilots who are in that route, you find out what the smoother altitudes are. So the first thing you do is request a more favorable altitude. And of course, your controller, the first thing they say to you is stand by. And I say, and you're sitting there shaking, and they say stand by. So they're busy doing something else. And they say, what can I do for you? Request that altitude's unavailable. Okay, long story short, eventually either the turbulence stops or you get a clearance to another altitude that smooths out. The opposite of the turbulence is if you find yourself in the middle of a jet stream, it's as silk as satin, and you're doing 700, 720 miles an hour over the water. Hope you get that going over to Switzerland. That makes the trip a lot faster. And so silky smooth in the middle of a jet stream, but if you're crossing that jet stream this way, you have your fillings rattling and you look to get out of it. The passenger safety first. Everybody strap in, including the flight attendants. My experience of being a Navy fighter pilot aboard the Enterprise for all those years, it's a very, very bonding experience. And you bond with others who are going through flight training with you. So you have what you call pre-flight reunions with this same group of 28 of us, and you have pre-flight reunions after you retire occasionally. You also have squadron reunions occasionally because you bonded with these, but everybody gets out and lives different lives and everything, so it doesn't happen all that often. And then in addition to that, you also have tailhook reunion that when you see your squadron friends. And now you bring all naval aviators together in Reno. They got thrown out of Las Vegas, but and you got to be out of line to get thrown out of Las Vegas. But anyhow, it's in Reno. Isabel's gone to some of those with me. And in addition, I've been to a number of, I love the F-8 Crusader, my favorite airplane. I've been to a number of Crusader pilot reunions with Isabel, with my daughter Maria, out in San Diego. So it's very natural to want to keep in touch. It's very bonding. Now, my own personal experience, 28 of us pilots aboard ship in my squadron, and they're all different human beings. I never had a problem with any of them. They were all friends. However, there were two of them who became my buddies. You know, and that would have been the one who became our best man, Sandy Sanders, and Rich Colby, who was rough and tumble Midwesterner, and we bonded especially closely. The squadron pilots who were Naval Academy graduates together, they bonded together. You see, it's that type of thing. So that was the deal on reunions.